Whatever gets people to stop talking. Anyway, good morning. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I was so excited when I saw the weather. It's all 50 degrees. I didn't realize it had tons of rain and traffic. But it's December in Columbus, so it could be worse than it was last year. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Excited to see such a large crowd. Clearly, we've got something that is on people's minds, so we're looking forward to today's discussion. For those of you who don't know, my name is Chad Aldis. I'm at the Fordham Institute here in Columbus. Fordham, for those of you who don't know, has been a long time supporter of school choice. However, we also emphasize not just choice for choice's sake, but because of the great opportunities it can provide for kids to get a better education. So over the last year or so, actually about a year ago, we saw a lot of negative publicity on charter schools. Some of it was based in facts, some of it was based on hyperbole and exaggeration. And what we wanted to do was take a little bit of a deep dive to learn more about the issues that were going on. So what we did is about a year ago, we commissioned 2 studies. The first study of which was released last week by Stanford University's Credo Research Unit. If you haven't seen that, please do. It's also available on our website. There's a few copies left out on the counter. And what it was a quantitative analysis trying to gauge how Ohio's charter school students are performing. Then the second study is what you're going to hear about today. And that is, we hired a national education consulting firm to give an outsider's view of Ohio. Because in Ohio, we're all pretty close to what's going on, so we wanted sort of a different perspective. So we've hired Andy Smarick from Bellwether Education Partners, a well-renowned national consulting firm, to come in and take a look at our laws, take a look at our policies, see how we differ from other states, where there are lessons we can learn, or things that we're doing really well. I'm not going to take much away from his remarks, since I don't know exactly what he'll say. So this is the report. Make sure you get a copy of it. It was just released today at 8 a.m. The way that this will work this morning is we're going to have, Andy's going to present for about 15 minutes, and we're going to have a panel discussion, which we'll try to keep to 20 to 30 minutes, and then try to leave 20 to 30 minutes for questions. For media here, I know Andy and myself will be available at 9:45. I can't speak for the other panelists, but if someone has questions afterward, we're happy to stay until the last one is answered. So, without further ado, I present Andy Smarick.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chad. Good morning. Is this working? Good morning. Thank you. So I'm so pleased to be here. It's so exciting to talk about this really important subject. And first, I want to really give thanks to Chad and the Fordham team for putting this together, for commissioning the report. I do charter stuff for a living, and I can't imagine that there's a more important state to do more important charter work right now than right here. So thank you to the whole team for making it happen. And I also, before I get started, although I'm up here, this paper that I'm part of, I was a small part in full disclosure. Julie Squire in absentia, not here, I have to give her great credit for doing really good work on this. And Kelly Robson, one of my colleagues, a native Ohioan who is from the Columbus area, hot here, who is right up in front of the table. Come say hi to her later. She was a great co-author too. So everything smart in the report is thanks to Kelly. Since Julie is not here, everything done in the report is thanks to Julie, so we can blame her for that. But in all seriousness, she was wonderful. If you want to tweet about this, Charter Road is the hashtag that we've been assigned. And if you want to say nasty or nice stuff about me, I'm at Smarick. It actually helps us curate what people are thinking about the report. If you hear something particularly interesting or if you have a question, tweet it and it becomes part of the public record in perpetuity. So with all that throat clearing out of the way, let me talk just about how this is going to get structured. I'm going to very, very briefly make sure we're all oriented on the size and scope of the charter sector in the state, how it kind of got to where it is right now, and then talk about this discouraging performance. If you read my biography or if you know anything about me, I've spent a big chunk of my career trying to expand school choice. And if I sound defensive, I am a little bit. I love chartering, but the results that you got from the Credo report are not encouraging, especially if you know the results that Credo has produced in other states, especially in other big cities. So I'm a friend of the family when it comes to chartering, when it comes to Ohio, but there's some tough love I think that needs to happen. So this performance conversation will be a piece of it, because that actually sets up the recommendations. And I'm going to blow through these 10 recommendations, spend way too little time on them, just in the interest of time, because you have a wonderful panel who will be much more edifying than I. But you can learn much more about the recommendations in the report, even in the executive summary. And interestingly, if I get this right, you will hopefully see in the recommendations, it will suggest to you why the problems that have materialized actually have materialized. And then I'm going to stop relatively abruptly without any kind of fancy conclusion, so we can go into the questions and panel discussion. So let's just begin at the beginning, the overview of the sector. So as some of you may or may not know, you have one of the oldest charter sectors in America. Your first law got passed in 1997. First schools were up and running in 1998. And growth was significant, especially in this early period. You can see it was like increasing, and then it skyrocketed for a while. And forecasting, a lot of this has to do with how you expanded what's called sponsorship, authorizing in the state. And I hold myself partially accountable for this. I was arguing 10 years ago, 5 years ago, multiple authorizers. I just thought there was a linear relationship. The more, the better. I have a more nuanced view, and part of our recommendations are part of my learning on this as well. But just to give you a sense of how big this is, the national peak of growth of charter happened in 1999, 2000, when they hit about 26% annualized growth rates. There were several years where Ohio was doubling the national height of growth rates. As a matter of fact, since 1999, you guys have grown 800% in your charter sector. The nation has grown half that size, 400%. So part of what would be in my mind at this point, or was in my mind when we were starting this, was, why did that happen, and what were the consequences of it? Is there anything to be said for current performance related to the rapid expansion? So just where we are right now, about 390 schools. This is always sort of tricky to get the exact number at any given moment. Serving over 100,000 kids, about 125,000. One of the largest charter sectors in the nation. The problem, though, of course, relates to performance. And we are not the first ones to point out that there have been some struggles overall in the aggregate performance of the charter community school sector in the state. This is from your state report card, your value-added measures, which is a measure of growth like student growth percentiles. As you can see, fully more than half of your charter schools have a C or lower when it comes to growth rates. And this is not common in other states when it comes to chartering. Generally, we're going to see a bell curve, as statisticians will tell you, but that bell curve is often shifted to the right of this with a lot of great performers and some on the left side of the distribution as well. So you've known this for quite some time. The more troubling thing is actually what Credo found. And so I want to make sure people understand Credo. It wasn't long ago that Credo, as a Stanford-based organization, was viewed by a lot of people as just a choice zealotry outfit because they love charters and lots of other stuff. So lots of people who didn't like choice didn't like them. Until 2009, when they came out with a report saying nationwide, chartering is getting pretty much equivocal results. They did state analysis that found that some states were overperforming, some were underperforming, of course. But they got more credibility because they were willing to say, listen, the data is saying that overall chartering is meh. They released a study a few years later, a more up-to-date one, and this becomes important for Ohio's case, because it showed that nationwide chartering was improving significantly, pretty much in every single state. And there were these other cities, like Boston and Newark and Detroit even, and New Orleans, where chartering was exceeding beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Boston's the greatest example. A charter kid in Boston learns a full year more in reading and math per year that he or she is in a charter as opposed to a district school. So 1 day of learning in a district equals 2 days of learning in a charter school in Boston. So Credo was saying things have gotten better nationwide, and things in America's big cities are pretty much extraordinary. And then there's Ohio. The initial study on Ohio wasn't all that encouraging. You certainly were not at the top. And then the most recent report released last week showed that despite the gains in other places, you guys were still middling at best. And so these are in standard deviations. If you read the Credo report, it takes you maybe 5 minutes to get acclimated to how they're reporting this. The gist of this, though, is the fact that all of these columns are pointed down. Whether we're looking at 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, the most recent year, on average, the average charter kid in Ohio is losing 14 days per year in reading and 43 days in math. Other than like Nevada, one of the lowest performing states, we're not seeing results like this. This is definitely the left side of the national distribution. Even more troubling from my point of view, because I spend most of my career trying to help disadvantaged kids in America's big cities. Your best big city, according to the report, is Cleveland. Now remember, Boston, a year more per year of growth. Newark, New Jersey, between 7 and 9 months more of growth. Washington, D.C., 100 days more of growth per year when kids are in the charter sector. According to this report, your best big city, Cleveland, is only able to outperform the district by 14 days in reading and in math per year. And if you believe NAEP2 data, this is the nation's report card, Cleveland is either the second lowest or third lowest performing urban district that we assess nationally, only beating Detroit in some subjects and only beating Detroit and Milwaukee and others. So there's serious trouble here. And our report was trying to figure this out. Why is this the case given that other things are working in other places so much better, especially in cities? And so we went about this business of looking at your legislation, your regulation, doing a whole bunch of interviews, reading third-party analyses. And because we're a research outfit, of course, we came up with policy recommendations, and got 10 of them, because people remember 10. You'll see in the report that a lot of these are overlapping, and we've kind of stretched some, but this will give you the contours of it. What I want to put a pin in, and I'm not going to talk about it here, and the report doesn't talk about it much, and I'm only going to allude to it at the very end, is policy is a big part of your issue, and I think that it's a necessary condition for getting much better results. You got to fix your laws and regulations and practices, but there's other sets of activities, what we generally call ecosystem work, which is nonprofit civil society work, school operators and human capital providers, that is equally important. So I would like you to believe that all the stuff that we're saying ought to get done, but don't think that policy fixes that the governor, if the legislature likes them, is a fait accompli. Everything's going to get solved afterward. As a big industrial Midwest city, you have a challenge when it comes to some of these things, as history tells us on the ecosystem front. So if any of you are social entrepreneurs, you might want to think about that activity. So again, full disclosure, I'm going to go way too fast. The first two are about accountability for sponsors. The first is about the new sponsors that are coming online. These are, in the field, we call them authorizers, the entities that are authorized by the state government to allow charters to get up and running. And here we're talking about the new ones, the future folks who want to get involved in this business. The good news is the department has used some authority to create a new system for assessing and weeding out, having a bar for quality to come in. For example, an 18-month planning period, making sure that there are standards and principles that they're adhering to. And we're hopeful about this, but as I like to say, the Reagan line, trust but verify, I think it behooves all of us to be skeptical. So you guys, at least at the State Department of Education, is on the right track here, but the only way this works is if the state implements this well, codifies it, whether through regulation or statute, to make sure that there's a high bar for entry if you want to be in the business of sponsoring. The other part that is important here is on the implementation side. Having been a charter authorizer, I know that politics gets involved in this stuff quickly, so making sure your staff at ODE or whoever's responsible for this is insulated as much from political pressure as possible and have the resources necessary, staff and funding to do this job, will serve you very well. That's number one. Number two, as I like to say, the reason why you got to focus on your new authorizers is you got an issue with your current authorizers. You have far more than most other states, other than states where chartering is pretty much a function of districts. You actually have 67. Massachusetts has one, New Jersey has one, Washington, D.C. has one. In those cases, they're non-district authorizers, so they're important, but you have 67. This is what your environment looks like. The majority of yours are LEAs, local school districts for the most part. You also have nonprofit organizations. This is uncommon. Minnesota's the big other state that does this. Institutions of higher education and what you call ESCs, your education service centers, and the State Department of Education as well. So everyone we talk to about charter quality, the folks who are knowledgeable, say if a state has charter quality problems, it's because you have charter authorizer problems. Getting that right fixes a whole lot. And I'm sad to say I think that you do have a charter authorizer problem. You could do a whole lot more to make sure that low-performing schools don't get started and low-performing schools don't expand and that they get closed when they're persistently low-performing. Now, the good news here is that your ODE has two avenues for doing something about this. The first is the ODE can actually close down a sponsor for non-compliance, for just breaking rules, regulations, stuff that's in statute. Unfortunately, it's only done that one time. So again, trust but verify. Is this something that's going to be invoked as much as is absolutely necessary? The second thing is new legislation tasked the department with coming up with a sponsor ranking system, which is great. It doesn't exist in a lot of places, but there's huge potential here. In effect, assessing sponsors based on the quality of their portfolio of schools. If you have 10 schools and they're all lousy as a sponsor, that probably says something about the work that you're doing. If your 10 schools are great, that says something as well. The problem with this, the good news is that ineffective schools in this assessment system can be barred from authorizing new schools. The trouble here is that the department is only allowed to officially revoke the power of 12 or 13 of those 67 authorizers. So there are essentially a bunch of them that are grandfathered in from this. And everyone we talk to, in my personal experience, is you're not going to get better at chartering. You're not going to have a better charter school sector until you have better sponsors. And until your state has the authority to weed out those who are not doing right by low-income kids in particular, you're not going to make the big size gains that you need to. So making sure your state takes its obligations seriously to oversee sponsors is essential. And so that is revoking the right of the folks who are persistently underperforming, not just those who have contracts currently. The third one is related to funding. Our research led us to this conclusion. It's actually pretty simple. There are a bunch of things in your statutes and regulations that actually encourage sponsors to have a bunch of schools underneath of their aegis. You have incentives to have big portfolios if you're a sponsor. Let me just give you a couple examples. You get your funding as a sponsor by having an authorizing fee. Take 3% of the state funding of the schools that you have. If you're a nonprofit and you have other activities that you do, like a Boys and Girls Club, if you have one school you're sponsoring, you get 3% of their money. If you have 2 schools, you get 3% of 2 schools' money. You can quickly see how, if you want to subsidize their other activities, you can do that. And your law actually allows that to happen. A sponsor is allowed to take the money they generate through fees, through authorizing, and subsidize non-sponsoring activities. And when you add to that the fact that these sponsors can also sell services to the schools that they authorize, for example, back office support, financial, and a whole host of legal services, you can see that if I'm a sponsor, I want to fund my activities, I get a bunch of schools, sell services to them, take 3% of their money, and have a really steady funding stream. This is uncommon in other states. You can see the logic behind this. If men were angels, this wouldn't happen, as the federalist papers say. But we got to realize that nonprofits believe deeply in what they do. All organizations do. And if they can think we get double the money if we have 20 schools instead of 10, or quadruple if we have 40 instead of 10, you see where the incentives are aligned. So our recommendation here is pretty clear. Ban, prohibit from this point forward the selling of services from an authorizer to a school. If you're a sponsor, you should be an objective assessor of school quality. You should be the umpire. You shouldn't be the coach. You can't be both at the same time. You're either helping a school or you're being a third-party accountability unit. The second is really simple. If you're getting money through sponsoring, you got to use the money for sponsoring. You can't subsidize other activities. And then there are these national recommendations on a hybrid funding model rather than getting all of their money through their schools, making sure there's a state line item so sponsors aren't chasing schools to get money. They know that they have the funding necessary to do their work. And in the ideal situation, you'd actually plus up, you'd give benefits to the best sponsors as opposed to the low performers. Now this is something that's fascinating to me. Unlike most states, fully half of your charter schools are run by either EMOs or CMOs. This is really uncommon. The way this works is a board of a nonprofit contracts or a performance agreement or a contract with this nonprofit or for-profit then runs the day-to-day operations of the school. This management agreement is the one that's supposed to take care of it. In other states, if the board of a school doesn't like what the management organization is doing, it's a pretty simple process. You terminate the agreement, you fire them. Not in Ohio. You actually allow in your state for a management company to actually appeal the decision to the state. And there are people who we read this policy to in other states who were blown away by it. your sponsors can actually fire your boards and actually keep the management company, even though the board was the one who hired the management company. You can see immediately all of the tensions this causes when you weight the scale in favor of, instead of the legal entity responsible for the school, the management company that is running it. Again, this is totally uncommon in lots of other places. Our straightaway recommendation on this is that policymakers should just end immediately the ability of a management company to appeal a decision. If you're a board, you get public money, you don't want to operate with this organization anymore, it's a done deal. The other thing that's fascinating here is in the Credo report, I want to linger on this for just a second so you realize how unusual you guys are. In other states, schools managed by CMOs and EMOs, but that's smaller, are generally considerably higher performing than schools that are not run by management organizations, what we call one-offs or mom and pops. So why is that the case? Well, in most states, a single school, Amistad in New Haven, which turns into Achievement First, the KIPP Academy in Texas that turns into KIPP, or Uncommon Schools, starts as one great school, it replicates, and the management organization is now in charge of a bunch of high-performing schools. That's how it usually works. For some reason, that's not how it works here. Your schools that are managed by organizations that run 2 or more schools, according to Credo, are lower performing than schools that are one-offs. How is it possible that you guys are allowing low-performing schools to grow such that they actually dominate your field? It's a big question. So our recommendation on this front is, given that you have so many authorizers and you have so many different organizations running schools, and a management company can run lots of schools through different authorizers, I can't today go online and quickly figure out what the entire portfolio of schools of a single management organization is. I have to look in a bunch of different places. You don't need this in other places. If there's one authorizer, I can find out how KIPP is doing or how DC Prep is doing. In here, I think you need performance reports for every single operator in the state, so taxpayers, advocates, and sponsors can know when they get an application, Joe Smith's charter company wants to start a new school. Look at their performance report. Well, they have 10 schools and they're all bad. Should they authorize them? Probably not. In some cases, the operating company will be good, but not all. The fact that you don't have this information is a big problem. Let me rapidly go through these last ones because some of them are condensed. Number 5 is a lot like number 4. It's absolutely essential that your governing boards are independent of the management companies, because I sat on a charter board before, and sometimes you've got to make really uncomfortable decisions about contracts, about staff, about personnel. And you need to make sure that these boards are always aligned with the best mission and the best interest of the schools. Unfortunately, for example, your state allows a management company to pay a board member up to $5,000 a year. That doesn't necessarily mean something iffy is going on, but if it's already tough for an organization, a board, to make tough decisions, now they're getting $5,000 a year from the people that they've hired. If they were a 50-50 case on whether or not to fire or make a tough decision, you might see that this, I get $5,000 in my pocket every year. Again, weighting the scale in favor of, instead of the board, the management company. We also, for these reasons, advocate that all charter board members actually behave as public officials and disclose, do whatever, you have a conflict of interest statement or other types of disclosures, just so we know, have total transparency about what everyone's motivations are. And this is particularly important given how important your management companies are. Often a board doesn't have a lawyer or have a financial officer. Those people often are the employees of the management company as opposed to the board. If we want boards to make tough decisions, they need full information. If they're getting paid by the management company, if all the information they're getting is from the management company, if their lawyer is paid by the management company, if their financial advisors are paid by the management company, you start to see, again, how the scale is tilted here. So we're recommending every board needs to have independent counsel, independent financial advice, so they can make the tough decisions necessary. One of the toughest decisions any charter sponsor has to make is about closing a school. Again, I've been an authorizer, I've been there. It is unpleasant business. It takes strength of will, some real gumption to close down a school. Often when parents are telling you, yeah, close down my school, my charter, but my kids are going to go to an even worse school. So it takes real courage for an authorizer to do this. Policy should support sponsors who want to do the right thing, But unfortunately, again, you guys are unusual, and you have what some people call sponsor shopping or sponsor hopping. The ability of the sponsor to indicate to a school that you're in trouble, you're not performing well, and then for that school to go out and look for another sponsor to essentially adopt it, to take it over. What this can do is allow low-performing schools to continue on longer than they should. It doesn't well serve kids, and it certainly brings down the aggregate performance of the charter sector as a whole. By itself, you might say this isn't that big of a deal, but when you start to put these pieces together, and you realize that sponsors, especially nonprofits or ECs, have a financial incentive to have lots of schools. If one organization wants to get rid of its low-performing charter and close it, and another one has a financial incentive to have more schools, you can quickly see that the adoption process will happen swiftly, not necessarily always in the best interest of kids. It's something that can be solved through policy. Now, number 7 is the last backward-looking one. You are one of 12 states that has an automatic closure provision for low-performing charter schools, which can be a good thing in the right circumstances. What's fascinating is you have different categories of schools that have different rules that apply to them. So, for example, you have 25 E-schools. You have 34 schools that primarily serve a special education population, 86 dropout recovery schools, and then you have these overlaps where schools can fall into different categories, so 2 special ed dropout recovery and 15 dropout recovery E-schools as well. And the challenge, of course, is that the rules apply differently to these. So dropout recovery schools are not, and special education schools, are exempt from the standard closure provisions that would apply to your general education schools. Dropout recovery, for example, schools are subject to closure for persistent low performance. It's not mandatory. Similarly, dropout recovery schools can improve a little bit on some metrics and get what NCLB calls safe harbor. You improve by 10% on a metric, and then you are not going to be subject to some of these closure rules. So clearing up those kind of problems, making sure that these loopholes don't exist, and doing the same thing with accountability for special needs schools. I give you guys credit. You have a lot of schools, charters that are set up for kids with high cognitive disabilities or other kinds of special needs. But what we're seeing in other states is not all those schools are good. They have good hearts, but their performance isn't always good. You need to have an accountability that says thank you to schools for trying a tough job, but holds them to high standards for getting results. This last category we put together because this is really about the ecosystem stuff. If you're asking the question, how can your state get more great schools, either recruiting schools from other states or incubating, starting, and growing your own, you need at least 3 policy things exactly right, and you guys don't have those 3 things right. Funding is the first one. As all of you know, I'm sure, a kid who goes to district school, if his or her parent decides to send that child to a charter school, only part of the money follows him or her, just the state funding, not the local funding. This is a non-trivial amount. The analysis that we come across on this is that, I want to make sure I get this exactly right, on average, charters in Ohio get 28% less in a state that some people say isn't funded well enough to begin with. In Cleveland, it's up to 48%. The charter discount on how much money you're having. So fixing the charter inequity funding problem is a big part of this. Also on transportation, charters can get transportation services, but often they don't work out, and if they get the funding, it's often not enough. As we like to say, choice is only meaningful if parents can actually exercise a choice, and transportation is usually one of the biggest hurdles there. What we really recommend, what a lot of cities are doing, is realizing that 50 years ago, we built a school transportation system for the one public education deliverer, the district. Now that we have a different public education delivery system, a district, private schools and voucher programs, a wide array of charter schools, we still have a transportation system for a monolith instead of an array of schools. So cities thinking differently about how you deliver K-12 transportation in a new K-12 system is essential. And then you need to strengthen your law related to facilities, making sure that they're actually accessible to schools that need it, if they're underutilized or empty, and also facilities funding would help a great deal. I know I went way too fast. These are the 10 things, and I'm obligated to do it. So Chad, why don't I stop there? Bring you guys up. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.